Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue with the wonderful book, The World's Greatest Ghost by Roger Bohr. Once again, delving into Chapter 5, Part 5, which actually should wrap up this chapter here, the one that's titled Ghosts of the Highways and Skyways. So again, we've seen some excellent examples of ghosts being featured both in the sky, on the road, and then in some cases in some buildings as well. This one will wrap up this chapter with some similar eerie encounters. The very first one, in fact, definitely stands out. It involves a cyclist with no head. So how about that? Imagine running into that whenever you're coming across your everyday well-to-do life. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start this next segment. It is aptly titled The Headless Cyclist, and here's what it says. George Dobbs was determined that the bitter weather and shortages of wartime Britain were not going to get him down. It was 1940 and the country was in the grip of one of the worst winters for years. Snow covered the countryside, and to make matters worse, the war news was gloomy. George wrapped himself up against the hostile night and then set out from his home near Northampton to walk to the Fox and Hounds pub for a few beers to cheer himself up. With his hands deep in his pockets, he struggled up the slippery slope past the cemetery when he noticed the dim headlights of a car slowly approaching, its wheels running in and out of the icy ruts. Framed against the lights of the car, George saw a cyclist pedaling. He too was having difficulty in steering his machine because of the snow and ice. At first, George thought that the cyclist had no head, but he quickly dismissed the idea as being a trick of the light or the fact that the rider had muffled himself up against the cold. The next time George glanced up, the cyclist was still fighting for control of his machine, completely unaware of the approaching car. But before George had the chance to cry out, the car drew level with him and chugged past towards Market Harborough. George could not believe it. The car must have hit the cyclist, he thought. And so he ran through the snow as fast as he could to the spot where he had last seen the cyclist, expecting to find the result of a terrible accident. But there was nothing. No cyclist, no cycle, and no accident. George searched both sides of the road in vain. He fled as quick as his legs could take him to the Fox and Hounds pub at nearby Kingthorpe. As he thought out in the pub, he told his story. When George finished, there was a silence until Lyd Grin, who was for many years the local gravedigger, leaned across the bar. He said, "That sounds just like the chap I buried 25 years ago. He was knocked off his bike in the deep snow outside the cemetery gates. His head was torn off in the crash." Next segment is called Spirit of the Disused Aerodrome. A young collector of military souvenirs knew who to blame when he found this tailor's dummy in an SS uniform hurled from its regular place in the hall of his home. While days earlier, both the man and his wife had been given the shock of their lives when an RAF pilot, complete with World War II leather jacket, helmet, and oxygen mask, appeared in their home in Croydon, South London. Clearly, the ghost did not appreciate finding reminders of an enemy in his new haunt. The young couple asked to remain anonymous when in 1978, after a series of odd happenings, they called in the Society for Psychic Research. They told investigator Brian Nisbet that the pilot had appeared 4 times, first in the wife's bedroom as she prepared for a dinner party, then in the lounge as the husband watched TV, and then twice more in the bedroom, once when the wife was ironing and once when the couple were together. After that, they saw him no more, but his invisible spirit began playing tricks on them and their guest. First, he hurled the offending tailor's dummy 10 feet across the hall. Then he turned up in the spare bedroom, where a young married couple were staying there as guests. In the middle of the night, the man got up to go to the bathroom. While he's away, the wife suddenly felt the bedclothes being wrenched from her naked body. It was the last straw for their hosts. They called in a local clergyman. Even during the exorcism ceremony, the phantom flyer could not resist a prank. The wife felt the strap of her bra being plucked, though nobody was standing near her. Investigator Nisbet discovered that the couple's house was on an estate built on the site of the old Croydon airport. But he said, "I have not been able to explain any of the things that have happened to these people." Then there's a little mini segment that's called Driving Force. A rector of the Yorkshire parish of Womble had a ghost which drove itself and a cleric up the wall. The Reverend David Warner had left his car parked in his driveway with the handbrake on. He said the key wasn't in the ignition, but it switched itself on and then moved off. If it acts as if it's possessed again, I shall have to exorcise it. Next segment is called Phantoms of the Highway, the Hiker, the Jaywalker, and the Hunchback Postman. The darts match ended early for Roy Fulton. It had not been a lively night. A pint and a half of lager and not much company in the little pub at Leighton Buzzard. Roy, 26, decided to drive to another pub, the Glider, near his home at Dunstable, Bedfordshire. It was a dark night and foggy patches hung over the flat, open countryside. Roy started up and drove his little van towards the village of Stanbridge. As he neared the first houses, the headlights picked out the dark figure of a youth standing on the roadside, thumbing a lift. Roy pulled up past the young man and waited for him to catch up. He looked up at a stranger's face. It was pale and drawn and framed by short, dark, curly hair. The young man was probably about 20. The only unusual thing about him was the white shirt he was wearing with an old-fashioned round collar. Roy opened the door. The young man said nothing. I'm going to Dunstable. Where are you for? Roy asked. The young man pointed towards Totternoe, a village beyond Stanbridge. He got in and shut the passenger door. Roy passed Stanbridge and drove on down the Totternoe road at a steady 45 miles an hour. The hitchhiker sat silently. As the road neared Totternoe, it was lit by street lights. Roy slowed down and took a cigarette pack from his pocket. Cigarette, he asked, flipping open the packet and holding it out to the passenger, but there was no reply. And so Roy shook the packet and turned to his companion, and there was no one there. The passenger seat was empty. Roy slammed on the brakes and looked all around him. He stared through the side window at the road stretching into the empty darkness. A cold draught blew across his neck and a chill gripped his stomach. His left hand edged across to the passenger seat, and it was warm. Roy reasoned that the hiker could not have possibly gotten out of the car at the speed of 45 miles per hour, and even if he had, he would have had to have opened the door, and that would have automatically switched on the courtesy light, but no light had come on, and the passenger door was firmly shut. Shaken, Roy drove on to the Glider. He ordered a large scotch and downed it in one gulp. Ashen-faced, he said, I've just seen a ghost. Lorry driver Laurie Newman spotted what looked like the figure of a man walking beside the A4 as he drove from Chippenham to Bath at 2:30 one morning. He slowed down to pull out and pass her, but as he did so, the figure turned and sprang, clutching the side of his cab and leering through the side window. Shocked, Laurie stared back into the face of a grinning skull. Sebastian Cliff also experienced a highway haunting as he drove from Bath to Warminster. As he approached the bend at Limpley Stoke, all of his dashboard gauges stopped functioning and he felt a sudden chill. Then a ghostly face appeared at his windscreen. As it slowly faded, the gauges began to work again. Spooky jaywalkers have startled drivers in the West Country. An old gypsy woman staggers across the Bath to Bradford on Avon Road. At Sally in the Wood, a spot notorious for vehicles plunging off the road. And at Barrow Gurney on the 838 southwest of Bristol, several drivers have skidded to a halt to avoid a woman in white coat who suddenly appears and then vanishes. Police at Frome, Somerset report that at least 3 motorists say they've been victims of a phantom hitchhiker. The man, aged between 30 and 40 and wearing a check sports jacket, stops cars between the villages of Nunney and Critchhill and asks to be dropped at Nunney Catch. But when the cars reach the village, he has disappeared. One driver was so shocked he needed hospital treatment. Has the ghost of a hunchback postman who died in 1899 returned as a 20th century killer? That was one theory being investigated by police in East Anglia after 3 people died on a lonely country road. The first victim on the A12 between Great Yarmouth, Norfolk and Lowestoft, Suffolk was a lorry driver who knew the route well. For no apparent reason, his vehicle careened off the road and smashed into trees in 1960, and the coroner coroner recorded an open verdict. 20 years later, a car driver who was also familiar with the road drove crazily into the trees. Within a year, a cyclist unaccountably swerved into the path of a car. Survivors of accidents on the same stretch of road have also claimed that a shadowy figure forced them to swerve. Andrew Cuttajar, age 19, of Lowestoft said, "The specter of an old man was standing in the slow lane just looking at me. I slammed on the brakes and skidded, expecting a thud. The car went straight through him and then hit the curb. There was no sign of the old man when Andrew got out to investigate." Former policeman Frank Colby, also a Lowestoft, claims he has seen a hunchback figure with long strangly hair on the A12. He just walked across the carriageway and disappeared, he said. Psychic researcher Ivan Bunn of nearby Oltenbroad believes that the figure may be the ghost of William Balls, a postman whose body was found in the area during the winter of 1899. Could it have been that he was still trying to deliver a message about his own death? And then that's it. That wraps up Chapter 5, Ghosts of the Highways and Skyways, Part 5, from the book The World's Greatest Ghosts by Roger Bohr. Let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. For starters, the headless cyclist. Isn't that creepy? I think that'll make a good video sometime in the future. I'm going to see if I can find more information. The idea that you can see somebody like coming across or nearby and you think they don't have a head, but obviously you're thinking, nah, that's crazy. And then as the closer they get, you realize they don't have a head. And then you realize that something else is happening. In this case, the car itself went through that ghost. And obviously that guy went to search for a body, but he found nothing. And then when he went to that bar, sure enough, he was told somebody 25 years ago was in an accident. They were on a bike and the head was completely torn off. What a crazy sight. And then the next segment was the spirit of the disused aerodrome. That was pretty neat. The idea that you have a ghost who was obviously somebody in the military who was in a world war, did not like the fact that there was now not a costume, but there was a military outfit from the opposing side in that home. That really riled them up. They in turn started to make a bunch of noise. They started appearing as well. They even pulled the bed sheets from the wife when she was buck naked in the house. And then, of course, they decided to do one last thing when it came to them plucking the bra of the wife again when they were going through an exorcism. Clearly, they did not like that uniform being there, and they made their intentions known. And then the very last segment was Phantoms of the Highways, just a lot of strange encounters, little one-offs here and there. I have talked about that before, the Phantom Hitchhiker. There's so many stories about them. The idea that each locale, somebody dies, usually in an accident, then they haunt that location forever. People pick them up. They think that it's like they're doing a good deed to a poor person that's on the road. And then once they turn away and they turn back to the seat, that person is gone. They basically like pulled the Batman when it comes to the movies. And so they're wondering what happened. And then they hear that something occurred in that area, something involving some poor person that was involved in some kind of accident. And then they ended with that unique story involving that postman with the hunchback who decided apparently to still deliver the mail during a severe winter in 1899, and they died during that winter. Unbelievable. Can you imagine some people go to that extent? Like, I believe in strong work and dedication, but wow, this poor person decided to still do this for their job. They ended up paying the ultimate price, and then they're still haunting that location. Crazy stuff. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and we'll end it here. Next part is going to start a new chapter, Chapter 6. It's called Ghosts of the Royals and Rulers. Interesting stuff. It'll involve kings, queens, presidents, and others. Great stuff. All right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.